resources, right? They would most likely be able to develop the land and to lease the portions from the persons that are not in a position to develop their land. And over time, that in itself would create a problem, right? Next slide. This is the next village, 36 feet wide strips by, I should see this, but some of these things are 700 something rods and all. I want to bring up this slide here. This is a very, right? No. The first speaker spoke about the sections, right? And how the villages were divided into sections. No. This village, I'm not sure if this is which one? Is Golden Grove or right. This village, the names of the persons who bought these strips are on the plan. And this plan probably dates 18 something, right? Maybe one of them same plans that you spoke about, right? So what we have is section A, B, C, and my section A most likely would be the foreshore properties. Then we have the properties between the road and the railway, and then we have these properties here behind the railway, right? But the names of the owners, right, are, this is Anse Grove, right? I just recognize it. This is Anse Grove, right? The names of the owners, and the plan would have the list of all the people who bought this plantation. So there's no issue as to who owned it, what who the ancestors were, and who the beneficiaries of it. I don't know, right? It's there. The people are right there still, right? Because when you go into the village, you see the same people, names, right? And even if you have a different name, right? These are the people, right? Next. Right. Okay. This is where it gets a little complicated. Right. I redacted the names and some specifics because these are real places and real people. Right. So somebody in a village own 1/32 part or share of in an abundant estate. Well, we know the estate there, right? So look at the number 1/32. So this village was divided into 32 pieces, but actually it was 8 strips, 8 lots. And this individual, right, got a transport for 1/32, right? And it refers to a plan dated probably the early 1900s or 18 something. This person who owns this 1/32 share got a problem, right? Because this is a significant piece of land, but how do you identify 1/32 of a whole village, right? When it's undivided, right? Yeah, so this person inherited a piece of land, but they inherited problems, right? So the first challenge they would face is to identify where they're taking out their 1/32 piece, right? And where the other 31 persons gonna get, right? It may sound simple, right? But it's not that simple, right? Because the transport may go on to read, save and accept something. Therefore, they gotta find the piece that they can't touch, right? So look at this other transport. Right. This person has a lot 35 in section B. right? And this is somewhere in Borbies. And they also got an undivided right, title, and interest in and to the undivided lands in Section A. The said Section A being laid down and defined by a plan, right? Some survey did it. So this person owned 2 pieces of land, right? They own a piece of land that is number 35, lot number 35. That may be very, very easy to find, but they also own, right, and a piece of some undivided land. So they got this other piece of land, a huge piece of land, and this person, they're one of the owners of it, right, in Section C. So they got problems there too, right? Because their 4 parents probably graze cattle on that piece of land. And everybody in the village probably just chase the cattle out there and graze it there. So they all own it. And then in the afternoon, they graze it back and it went back to pen. But we're talking about 100 and something years ago, 100 years ago, right? The dynamics would have changed, right? So there we have there, right? How do we protect and how do we guard the interests in situations like these, right? I don't have all the answers, all right? I can only make suggestions based on how similar issues like these were handled, right? And resolved. Next slide. Okay, this is the next one. This is somewhere in Georgetown. I know it's way, but some 149 part of a piece of land, right? And the land is 45 acres, so somebody got 149 part of it, right? Right. So this piece of land divided in 149 pieces, and this person own 1 part, right? So I know how they're going to claim the land. Right. Okay, so when we looked at the first description, we identified that the description, no, the second one was multiple properties on a single transport, right? So because the property, the transport spoke to a 45, then it spoke to an undivided portion. Now, here's where the problem is here. The owners of this property may have died years ago and passed on this property to dependents, and they may have sold the house lot. This is lot 45, right? And because they may have not been able to occupy the undivided part for some reasons. One, the place may have been subjected to flooding and they stopped farming there, right? They utilize the drainage system and irrigation system for navigation because the dams don't function at certain times of the year, and even when they function, you really can't use them. So what they use was the canals or the trenches to go down with a boat and reap the crop and come out. And if those drains are all blocked up and overgrown vegetation, the people can't go into the farms. It requires a significant capital investment to maintain those things. And these villages don't have that economic base to undertake those things. So a lot of the infrastructure that was used in the past fell apart and these lands were left abandoned. So let's assume, for argument's sake, that they sold the house lot and they came to Georgetown where they got street lights. Right? But they still own the undivided part, but they may not be aware, right? Because the transport would not automatically cease to exist because they sold the house, right? It would be then that the residual lands on the transport still reside with the original owners. And if they don't transfer that to the next generation, it becomes lands that are unoccupied, but on paper, there's an owner. And a lot of lands that have been lost as a result of that kind of activity. And those are the issues that we are confronted with at where from my lens, is where I see the most. And these undivided lands contribute to a significant portion of agricultural lands in the C, D, E, and F sections of the villages. And they are also referred to as communal lands and all kinds of things they call them, but it's difficult to identify the owners because the owner is not a single owner, right? It's owned collectively. And a lot of people who own it are not here with us anymore. And the dependents or their next generation, although they're aware of it, right? Because of the same issue mentioned of the lands not being properly subdivided, to find them is another problem. They know of it, but they can't identify with it because it's difficult to find, right? So we spoke about the undivided shares, and we spoke about, so the residential agricultural phenomenon is where the residential land attached to the agricultural land, and that is being sold, but the agricultural land is left in no man's land, so to speak. Then we have this area of the depth to breadth ratio that I mentioned before, when lands are narrow and difficult to develop because of the narrow strip. And a lot of these lands are 750 rods long, right? And unless you own a significant facade, right, you can't do much in terms of development, right? It has to be done, as I mentioned before, as a collective effort. The accessibility to the agricultural lands is the other thing that resulted in lands being lost, because if you can't access it, you can't use it, and if you can't use it, you will lose it. Okay. Next. Okay. So if the landowner, transport landowner, dies intestate, what happens? The lands would go to, by law of succession, would go to, but if they die, right, then there's a challenge, because somebody's got to go and dig up and see who really this place belongs to. And that costs money, right? There's a legal process. A lot of people who are in that situation can't afford to get these legal matters resolved because they don't have the means and resources to do it. So there's a double dilemma, right? Because everything referenced to land has to go through the court. Land is property. No. There is a way out, right? There's a way out. I'll mention it just now, some of the possible ways out, right? Now, I spoke about occupation of possession. Now, one of the things that's been happening is that because people who have titles to land or transported land are not occupying it, others are occupying it. A lot of it are being occupied, and it's with the knowledge of the owners. But we live in a society where, as I mentioned before, we rely a lot on oral arrangements. And unless you have witnesses and they're prepared to come forward and say yes, right? It'll be one person's word against another person. So when others come in, the intentions sometimes are not that good, and they come to occupy because they see that as a pathway to ownership. And then you end up now fighting for lands that you know belong to you, right? And the first thing you have to prove is that you're the owner, but you don't have the title in your name, but by natural justice, you're the owner because it's your inheritance. You and others, right? You and your cousins, right? But they may be the people who not too bothered about whether it's acquired by others or not. But you were concerned, but you can't do anything about it, right? So managing the caretaker is important because if you leave people trusted to take care of your property, you have to have the legal mechanisms in place to ensure that you're not robbed of your property with your permission, right? No, the law is very clear on how these things are going, right? Because the government can acquire land by compulsory acquisition, right? As in the case of a road, right? Or a school, right? And there's a mechanism in place for that. There's a process of consultation, and oftentimes the people are not happy, right? But at least there's a process, right? And there's lands that can be lost through adverse possession or prescriptive rights, meaning that if the occupier of a parcel of land is occupying this land without fear, favor, they're not paying a rent, and they're not there with permission from you, right? They can present a petition to the court for grant of title to that land. And if you do not object in a timely manner, or even if you object and the evidence are there that this person was occupying in accordance with what the law prescribed, the court will grant them title. Now, this process has been misused, I must admit, right? But we are responsible for the stewardship of our property, and the state, in some extent, can assist in that, because where all these confusions present themselves, there's an avenue out where the lands are sometimes, the state stepped in and say, okay, there seems to be confusion here. Let us declare this area a land registration area. We will examine all the transports, see who all the owners are, who claim to be owners, and then we will subdivide this thing to make them happy, as happy as possible, right? So they have a process that starts with the consultation, gazetting, and say, okay, we want to prescribe, we want to declare this area land registration, and all the people with vested interest come forward, and they would come forward with transport, said, my grandfather got a 1/50th share, and they split up the land. It has been done all over Guyana, right? And the state also sometimes steps in where we got all these narrow strips, and they recognize that the occupants cannot beneficially occupy land because of how it is configured. And you establish land development schemes, like in the case of MMA and Blackbush Polo and all those things, where you rearrange the orientation of land so that everybody benefit from enough drainage, access, and all those. So there's a role for everybody in this thing. But what we're here to discuss today is how do we, first of all, become more conscious and aware of the challenges that face us, and secondly, how do we articulate a position to the powers that be, to our communities, to our relatives and friends, as to what we can do individually and collectively to guard against all these things happening. So what I presented here was my little understanding of the topic through the lens of a land surveyor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trotman. I think land surveyors got thick lens. They see a lot. And certainly, you're building blocks here. We have a historical perspective. Now we've gone into some concrete situations that are confronting our people in relation to lands. I think we're getting a clearer picture of the problem we're confronted with, which we really want eventually to resolve. We've had a situation recently where there was the involvement of a town council and a private person in claiming ownership and sale and so forth of lands in BV. We have the privilege today of having Mr. Elton McCrae, a conscious and active citizen. He himself is an engineer, agricultural engineer, specializing in agricultural equipment, but a very active Baronian and a councillor, if I'm not mistaken, of the BV Triumph Democratic Council. And so he has had real experience with issues of attempts to claim and dispose of lands between the council and private individuals. And so we want to invite Mr. McCrae to explain to us that particular situation so we get another perspective and understanding of how our lands can be affected, how they can be lost, and even how they could be reclaimed and maintained in the face of predators. Mr. McCrae.
Thank you, Brother Chair. And I must say thanks to the Central Executive of the IPADG for allowing me to ventilate this issue to this gathering. Now, our lands, that is, lands owned by Africans in Guyana, are simply under attack. Many of you would remember in August, September of 2021, or was it? Yeah, 2021, when Kingley, people of Kingley, some people marched into Kingley under the advice of the Attorney General to take lands owned by Africans. Brother Lincoln Lewis had the devil's job in trying to protect those lands, right? Recently, we've had this situation in Mocha, again, something very topical. However, BV's lands, the lands in BV that in question were lands that the community got by way of a land grant. Specific date, I'm not sure, but sometime in the 1930s, all the villages on the East Coast, Pleasance, BV, Buxton, Golden Grove, we all benefited from that land grant, from the Crown Grant, they called it. In Buxton, for instance, those lands remained within the community, and it's referred to as communal lands, as the brother said, undivided. But I don't think in Buxton, the people were identified as owners. It's just communal lands. Whoever wanted to go and utilize those lands, they could have gone to the council and said, look, me want to farm this piece, because the last man now plant no more. And it was agreed to. So those lands, but in BV, what happened is that the lands were initially leased to farmers, and a decision was made sometime in the 40s, because the oldest transport I've seen is dated 1947. to sell those lands to the said farmers. Those lands fall in sections F and G. Section G is the area we are concerned about. Section G is 143 acres, and it's divided into 215 plots, of which the council still owns 5 plots. Yet, they attempted to sell our lands. It so happened, the very day I should have been going on to the council, someone sent me a note saying, hey, this is what happened. The council sell the entire Mackenzie. We call that section G in the village Mackenzie, BV. So they could sell Mackenzie. Me grandfather get land there. And we got the transport. I don't know, talked to a couple of people. So that morning, I went around the village trying to, because I know some of the people who owned lands there, telling people, hey, villagers, the council sell your land. Got to the council the afternoon. The fellas decided they are not gonna allow me to swear in because unless I apologize to the council, I should have waited until we get there and they would have given me an explanation why they sold our lands. Can't happen. Anyhow, the crux of the matter is, again, that same Attorney General advised one of the PPP members of the council, according to him, I don't know if he actually did advise, but the man keeps saying he was advised by no lesser person than the Attorney General that those lands are village lands and he can, the council can sell it. Now, my contention is, even if they are village lands, who owns it? The village, not the council. So the council should have gone to the village and seek permission. And that is how these people operate. There are many other pieces of lands in BV that they claim are village lands and they have disposed of it. So this section G, the 140 acres that John Fernandez had attempted to acquire, is just a tip in the iceberg coming out of BV. You guys are going to hear a lot more about BV and lands because we have a situation there where councillors, people are made councillors without understanding the issue of the village. People are made councillors without understanding their roles, the role they ought to play within the community. They feel that, look, I'm now a councillor, no, I can boss the thing around, that kind of attitude we're getting in the village, straight up. Now, I will give you a bit of background because as brother said, one of the main elements of owning, you must occupy, occupation. We have not been occupying those. Reason being, way back into the 70s, those of you who are old enough will know that we had just gotten independence and, well, I should back up a bit. The lands in our farmlands, we pay rates and taxes, but D&I, that section of government was responsible for looking after the drainage and irrigation for those lands. And the government, because of whatever exigencies in the 70s, they could not have afforded to, because they were government been having all sorts of problems. And many of you will remember statements like, hold on, things gonna change, ban your belly. This is what our farmers and communities was. I grew up in that village in the 60s, 70s. It was a significantly important farming community. The canals going into BV back dam was, as Brother U.C. Guyana described, a super highway. Every morning you could have seen a number of boats. I will say maybe about 50 boats going into BV. Well, I live on the Triumph Canal, irrigation canal going into the back dam and will come out in the afternoons. Many of us youngsters, we will wait for these boats to come out to be joggers, and to get some mangoes, whatever the fellas bring out. Then they will load them onto the train next day and they come to Georgetown to sell. So we supplied a lot of the provisions, fruits that were sold at Border Market and Stabrook Market in those days. So a lot of people say black people don't farm. It's a lie. I can tell you, I can name farmer, old women, especially a lot of the women. The men may be working with transport or they may be working somewhere else doing their carpage, but a lot of the women went into the backlands in those days too. Right? So, as I said, the things were, there were a lot of constraints for whatever. And so our D&I was neglected and it continued to be neglected up to today. So, because if you cannot access it, because we depend, as I said, we depended on boats to bring this stuff out and the dams. So eventually people stopped going. We had a bit of respite in BV in that the Boko Sugar Estate, which then became Gaisuko LBI, they used the canals to also transport their canes. But sometime again, in the early 80s, they built what they call the CNC, Central Navigation Canal, connecting Enmore Estate to LBI Estate in the backland. So there was no longer need for ponds to come through the village. When the ponds would come through, even though we hadn't the drag line or excavator passing through, the main you pay in hours. So I can show you receipts for last year and this year. No, so because we talk on the road. So they call the meeting with the village. I went there. Well, BV Triumph, two separate villages. They decided they will have one meeting in BV and one in Triumph. I went to the BV meeting, even though I'm from Triumph, but that day we were few, and they said, okay, they'll keep one bigger meeting. But I told the guys who were there, the people who were there, that in no uncertain, the lands belongs to people. I got my old lady transport home, and so on. So, and they said, no, but make an excuse. Okay, we will come back to you guys, to the community, we do some research. But lo and behold, no. In fact, the council said, from what I understand, the council, apart from two councils who are staying in the room, that agreeing to the sale, but they never fixed the price. This was done in October's or November's council meeting. Lo and behold, yes, November. On the 30th of November, a deal was signed with John Finance by that inner grouping, including the PPP councillor and the chairman. They make the decision and say, well, the people wanted it badly, so we made a decision on the price. I mean, it was illegal. So I got the wind of it, as I said, the day I should have been going on to the council on the 17th of December. Councillors, the rest of councillors did not know that the thing was sold up until when I went around the village and said, but we were waiting to come back at this council meeting to decide on a price. Because they told the councillors that the lands are not owned, it's owned by the council, and the Attorney General said they can sell it. So they went ahead with that decision, though, as I said, two councillors abstained. I need not call their names, they know themselves if we no. But if anybody wants to hear the names, I can say the names later. Huh? We had Councillor Duncan and Councillor Williams. Councillor Duncan's grandfather was a former chairman, so he had an idea. And in fact, he even owned lands there in the section. That's what I can't understand, why he allowed it. On the council was a former village chairman. When the raid project was being instituted, that village, No, because a former councillor told the people when they first came, asked if the village has any lands. He said yes, but he did not realize the magnitude of the project that they were. He said yes, the village got some lands at the back dam. When he realized that they were looking for 500 acres, he said no. But by then they had gone far ahead. He just answered the question if there were any village lands in the back dam. He said yes. When the raid project was about to go on stream, we all met and we told them again. So this chairman, who is now a councillor, he was aware that the lands in question were owned, but he voted, or he allowed it to be passed. And I'm not sure if he was at that meeting, because since I've been there, December, he's probably been there twice for just a few minutes. He has not been going to meetings. So I'm not sure if he was there present. I did not check the register to see if he voted. But I know they said all present voted except these two councillors. So I'm saying he should have been able to advise those younger ones, but he did not. He chose not to for whatever reason. I cannot say why. So coming forward, I wrote a letter to the press, which was published. John Fernandez, on seeing that letter, did I write it? Was it my letter or the letter, or because of, anyway, I wrote a letter, and the Starbuck News also, they picked it up with an editorial. Subsequent to that, John Fernandez said, look, we are not interested if it's going to be contentious. And I think John Fernandez was right, because when I told people, they said, John Fernandez, that company will not get into such a deal. But what shocked me with John Fernandez is that they then went around and instead of giving back the dealing with the council, and the council, must say, erred in a way, because when eventually I was, because we appealed to the, GCOM, and GCOM told them they have to have us installed. So this installation happened a few days after, and we discussed. They said until they see, the chairman said to me, if he see at least one transport, he will stop the deal. Up until I showed him a number of transport, because again, as I said, I knew people whose family had lands there. We showed him transport. He went on TV and said, John Fernandez walked away because of a leaked document. That was his first statement. John Fernandez walked away because of this. Oh, and he tried to present to the community the kind of benefits that we could have derived had we gone ahead with such a wonderful project. That stayed there. January month, showed him at the next meeting, as I said, I showed him a few transport. I think 8 or 9 of them I showed him then. Yet, I asked, if you guys are not going to refund the people money, we can't do that because we have a contract and all sorts manner of nonsense, financial jiggery-pogery, they were telling me. They have to wait until John Fernandez asks them for the money because John Fernandez can sue them. No, I don't understand. No, but it was all gerrymandering. Not to give. Eventually, they found some letter, because I said, why don't you go to that was in March month, February, March month. I said, because I said, why don't you ask the PS to instruct the overseer to do it? Because the PS has that is PS, local government should have that authority to instruct the overseer to write, because she claims she has to have a paper trail. She cannot just write a check on a void. So eventually in April month, they found a letter where the instruction was sent down, and this was dated sometime before. And they attempted to write the check then to John Fernandez. They took the check to John Fernandez sometime in May. John Fernandez said, did not receive it because they had already disposed of it. In fact, when we wrote to John Fernandez inviting them, because we said, I also suggested, invite John Fernandez to a meeting and let them make, because that meeting will be an official, the minutes of that meeting will be an official document. We can then use the minutes to say, as a basis for writing the check, that we have agreed that the sale will go off. As you are saying, you no longer want it, because they were saying they couldn't operate, even though John Finance says they can't operate with, what do you call it? This social media comments. Said, no, it was in the Starbuck News. Newspaper does write anything what they want. This is our messenger from, what you call it? From Anil. Newspapers write anything they want, you can't go by them. Yeah. So anyhow, they wrote to John Finance for this meeting. Instead of John Finance responding, Mohammed's sons and daughters, logging, mining, timber, I don't know what more, limited, decide that they're gonna respond to us. So we can't accept that. We want John Finance. Asked for the meeting with John Finance, and I think our overseer aired. We asked that she write a letter to John Finance inviting him to this meeting. Called the day, John Finance coming. When we got there, Mohammed's sons and daughters, people there, we walked out to the meeting. On that day, that Mr. Mohammed Johnson, he named Mohammed Johnson, threatened me. And, I'm really sorry I didn't go to the police or have him on record and go to the police. He threatened me. But that was that. And so at that point, I decided we need to go get a lawyer to. I compiled a list of lawyers, spoke to a number of lawyers, and they said, agreed that yes, we will do it pro bono. One lawyer came on board because he was the first man I spoke to. He came, he met with us. He said he wanted to meet the farm, the residents. He wanted to go in the back dam. I said, Bana, me neighbor going. The lands we are talking about is about 6 miles off from the village. And if you're going through BV, it's primary vegetation you're looking at, going down the BV dam. So I said, me neighbor go down there. He said, well, at least he want to come in the village and talk to. He came into the village and he was pushing, he got some business from the people in the village who had other land issues. He said, well, we will need 5 people, at least 5 people to file an ad litem. And this is what I have an issue with some of our lawyers. Initially said he will work with us pro bono. I consulted with some colleagues. They said, look, we must raise funds to pay the lawyers something. May not be the full fee that they're asking for, but at least you must give them something. Because this case, if we were with John Finance and them, that's when the moment people keep, we may have to end up at CCJ. So we can't expect people to be working pro bono all the way to CCJ. So he came, he said to us, we need at least 5 persons to do this ad litem, who are trans. When I said I got the 5 people. Well, you see, each one of you will have to pay me. And this ad litem is just to ask the court's permission to file an injunction. Not the injunction yet, because we were saying file an injunction. He said, so we asking the court's permission to file the injunction, and he wanted $125,000 from each of the 5. Mr. Tal, we back out. The same man, then he harassed me a bit again, that I keep him back progress in the village, and he got children to mine, and all kind of story we hear. Continued looking for people. John Mohammed then filed a suit against the council. So we didn't have to go anymore with the injunction. All we now need to do is join the case. Thankful to Professor Melissa Eiffel. I met with her and she said, look, Elton, let us launch an appeal and we will get that money. She launched the appeal, went to a lawyer, Brother U.C. Anderson. He gave us a fee, which will cover the initial operations of filing and research, whatever he had to do. After which we will pay him a certain sum for appearance. We agreed to that, though I still wanted us to work with a group of lawyers because I felt in case, he agreed that that can be if this case gets dragged out, because we were looking at people who seemingly has deep pockets, Mohammed's sons and whatever it is. Their claim to the property is that they were the agents who brought the council and joint finance together. Though in the council's defense, I see they're putting it on your brother land surveyor, what's his name? It's public, so I can call his name. Chapman, as the go-between, right? I spoke to Chapman when I saw the defense. He said nothing of the sort. Now his name is out there. I hope he can come and defend. He will be able to defend himself. Because I don't know if having a land surveyor's be operating as a land surveyor can also operate as a property agent. I don't know. He will have to tell the fraternity how he got there. Anyhow, and you know, the whole thing is he knows that the lands belongs to people because he was part of this whole discourse with when we were discussing, because he lives in the village, got married to an in-law, his in-laws from the village, and they left the country, the same migration issues. So he's living in his sister's house, who got married to a relative of mine. So he's living there. So he's aware of what's happening in terms of ownership of those lands. So I don't see why he would want to be the go-between for that. Long story short, we inserted ourselves into that matter, and we did not just ask to be part, should I say? We asked, okay, yeah. We asked to add the Attorney General to this matter on behalf of the government because we felt that the government failed us because, as I said earlier, government should have been looking after the D&I because they have not looked after those issues. We felt that they should be there. Also, we felt that these lands should come under the protection of ancestral lands, and government should be keen on trying to protect ancestral lands. I mean, the 2010 land reform protected government lands, but did nothing for African lands. If you take a check, most of the lands owned by transport in this country are village lands. We have a significant amount of lands owned by, which we acquired in that period, post-emancipation period, which became known as the village movement. And those lands should be protected. And I sit here today, I'm appealing that we in this hall and those listening should promote the idea of having African ancestral lands protected. The judge allowed us in, but he rubbished that ancestral land bit. And eventually what he said is that at the court, on the day of court, because we have injected ourselves and we had transports, I must mention, sorry, that the village, after Mohammed come up, the council decided they will have a lawyer to defend them. But that lawyer, he again, based on what he probably was told by the rest of the council or those in charge, that the transports that we have can be questionable. And if you're going to tell me that my transport is questionable, then I can't depend on you. Definitely, we have to get somebody from the outside to represent us. So Brother UC Anderson did insert himself, and he presented our transports. 10 of us came forward. There was an 11th person. Well, I must mention BV Triumph. Triumph has a lot of Indians because in time because the lands were there, Indians came into the village. So by the time the lands were being shared out to farmers, they were Indian farmers. So we have some Indian families owning those lands too. So I think in the 10, there were 3 Indians who signed on. The 4th Indian, he didn't sign on because he no longer lives in the village, He lives in a more predominantly Indian neighborhood. And he said when he told one of his relatives what he said, they told him they'd burn his house if he only signed the document. You know, because it's the government wants the land and John Finance is just a front. So I don't know. So the judge said the whole issue after John Finance, Mohammed, sorry, not John Finance, said that they want to back off because now transports are there and we have inserted ourselves. They backed off and we are back with our lands. And I hope we will be able to occupy those lands in lava time.
Thank you very much, Brother McCray, for updating us of the actual situation that occurred. It now falls to me to make what should be my presentation, which I hope to do in lab time. You've heard the first presentation, which gave us a background of the history of these lands. You've heard the second presentation, which showed us a lot of the challenges that arose. And what I will try to do is to build on what has been presented from a standpoint of local government involvement. I went to the Municipal and District Councils Act, trying to get some understanding in relation to this thing called undivided lands. You've heard that term already. Much of what I would say is centered around the concept of undivided lands. When I went to the Municipal and District Councils Act, Section 320, it said all undivided lands in every council area, and listen carefully, except private lands held in joint ownership or ownership in common, shall be under the control and management of the council. So the Municipal District Council Act talks about undivided lands, but it is very clear that if they are private lands, then the council has no say in the matter, though they may be undivided. This is the Municipal and District Councils Act. This suggests to me, in fact, that you have categories of undivided lands. Categories. And when you're dealing with the municipalities, they don't get involved in private undivided lands. So I then went to the Local Government Act, Section 47. And what did that say? All undivided lands or portions of lands in polders, pastures, roads, dams, sluices, etc. of every village or county district will be under the control of and management of the local authority. So that the Local Government Act, forget municipalities, seem to suggest that undivided lands, all told, whether private or otherwise, come under the control of the management of local authorities. And that's what the Act, that's my interpretation of the Act. It then goes on to say the local authority of a village or county district may let to any person by monthly or yearly tenancy or for a term of years, and such rent as it may be fixed by the local authority with approval of the minister, any undivided lands. So it seems to suggest that the local authority has authority over undivided lands. But what it specifies here is it shall let, this is a sell, it's a let to any person by monthly or yearly tenancy. So it does not say sell. What occurred to me, and let's backtrack a bit. There are two types of villages: communal villages and proprietary villages. Proprietary villages, from the very inception, people got their transports. So they buy the land individually, they got the transports. And I don't think proprietary villages has the same undivided land relationship necessarily like communal villages. In other words, where in a proprietary village, you get your land, you get transport, and you got no issue about some other set of land of which you have a part. But in communal villages, there's the issue of undivided lands. They would have purchased the village and get one transport for the village. And then they would have gone on to get individual transports for the front lands. And on that transport, and I saw an example Mr. Trotman showed me, on that transport, it would say, you own land so-and-so, describes the land. And a proportion of undivided land equivalent to your proportion of the transported lands. So if you got 10 transported lands and they're all the same size, then you have 1/10 of the undivided land. But as was correctly said before, if you look at the definition of undivided lands, though you have 1/10, it doesn't specify where this land is. It's just a part of 1/10. It's just 1/10 of the land. So it's rights, but it doesn't say here the boundaries of this land. It's apparent to me that when the villages were established and the management committees were established, that the village gave to the management committees the authority to manage the undivided lands. So the village management committee, this is not local government yet. This is the people themselves. Authority to manage the undivided lands. And they could decide whether they want to make pasture, whether they want to farm, whether they want to give up the common lands for church and recreation and so. But you heard earlier on that when the villages ran into problems, they appealed to the government to institute a local government system so you have state authority to extract taxes. And what, in my view, occurred was once they abandoned the voluntary management system and local authority stepped in, then the local authority became responsible for the undivided lands where they had not divided them. And hence the provisions I read just now from the Local Government Act, that in the villages, the local authority is responsible for undivided lands. Let me repeat, it didn't say sell, it's a let. So all of these other problems that were mentioned by Mr. Trotman and Elton, are situated in the context of these on how undivided lands are treated, or undivided lands are treated. And Sister Jackson made the point early on that the state was not very helpful in terms of coming in and surveying and making sure everybody got the transport. So all sorts of things happened in terms of land remaining undivided. And then all the other problems with families not knowing that they have backlands and they only take possession of the front lands and all of that occurred. Now, this all happened initially in a system where there were village councils and country councils. By and large, the village councils meant that the original owners were the council people, and therefore, though local government took charge, it's as if they were still in charge of what's they own, because it's the same villagers who are now council members and so. So they're still in charge of what's they own. In the case of country councils, in the main, I think those were the councils where they had land development areas. Land development areas. Those were called country councils. And in my recollection, the latest of those councils, we don't have them anymore, would have been Virginia, down in Mahaica, and the Grove area. Those were the two last country councils. And they were really land development areas. And when the state finished the land development process, which you heard about, they would then hand them over to village or district councils. In 1980, we went through a reform process. And that process talked about a local democratic system and talked about 6 tiers of local democracy. The People's Cooperative Unit, the Neighborhood Democratic Councils, the Community Democratic Councils, the District Democratic Councils, the Sub-Regional Democratic Councils, and the Regional Democratic Councils. So there was an intention to introduce 6 tiers where we previously didn't really have tiers. We had village councils and district councils and country councils. Interestingly, in most instances, a People's Cooperative Unit would be the equivalent to a village in the countryside. It would be the equivalent to a village. So if that system was implemented, there would still be a unit in charge of what was the village, and therefore the local people would still be in charge of their land, with all the problems that attended that. However, by the time we got to 1994, under constitutional arrangements, we decided that we will only have immediately in place neighborhood democratic councils and municipalities, with the neighborhood democratic council being a council that brought together a number of villages. So a good example is Fowles Buxton. Now, Buxton used to be a village with its own council, but Buxton is now a part of a place called Fowles Buxton. Another example is Pleasance Industry. You have some other examples. For example, where Dartmouth is, they are part of a neighborhood as well. Where Queenstown is, they're part of a neighborhood. And what has occurred is that where these villages are now parts of neighborhoods, they are a minority. And so the neighborhood is controlled by people other than the villagers. And this power in relation to undivided lands seem to have been passed over to the neighborhood. That's the local government now. So in my language, aliens have gotten control of the lands because the council could make decisions in circumstances where those lands, I would describe them as undivided private lands, because the people buy them. We could use all the other terms, communal and all of that, but in real legal terms, they're undivided private lands insofar as they were purchased and belonged jointly to groups of people. And so that is where the dilemma has now taken us. Not only do we have problems of lands not being divided, of people selling and transactions not including all of the lands, but we have a situation where the neighborhood council now has control, apparently. And if you understand Guyana, if a neighborhood council has control and it's related, then for all intents and purposes, central government got control. And they would then decide how to tell the neighborhood what to do and who would eventually get control over those lands. And so some of the councils have been cooperating in circumstances of undivided lands. And apparently in the case of BV, even where the divided lands, they try to cooperate in the case of PP. And so colleagues, we are gathered in the first instance to get an understanding of this murky situation. It's murky. But more than getting an understanding of the murky situation, we are gathered to put our heads together to see how we could move forward to get out of this murky situation. Very murky. There were those of us who hoped that the COI would have gotten us out of this. The land commission that was established by former President Granger. But we haven't heard the end of that. Now, there are those of us who have seen this problem quite a while. So for example, when I was involved in the constitution reform process, 1999, 2001, we argued for the reintroduction of village councils. We didn't get it. What we got as a compromise was a provision which says that villagers reserve the right to request the establishment of village councils, and that the government has to put a process in place to facilitate that re-establishment if the villagers so request. Now, for me, that's partly a halfway shop to a resolution of the problem, because then you would go to the next stage and say, if you have village councils, return to them the responsibility for local lands. So the people themselves would retain control over their lands. And you may even go further to do things like say, like the law in a sense says that they can't sell, although it is their lands, given the fact that they're undivided, you don't know who's the exact owner and all of that, that they can't sell the lands. What they could do is manage the lands in the interests of the village. So there are pathways that could be created for some resolution of the problem which confront us in relation to what many refer to as ancestral lands. There are pathways available, but those pathways require for people to walk the path. It's not gonna happen like that. People have to walk the path. And so before we get into the discussion on these matters, the proposition that Ipadaji has in mind is one, that we should seek to have what I call a judicial interpretation of what's undivided land. A judicial interpretation, because that too may be a little murky. I think I understand what it is, but it might be a little murky. Because even in the law, one time they talk about undivided lands, next time they talk about commons and things like that. So one of the things that we should seek to do is to get a judicial interpretation so there's no ambiguity about the undivided lands. Secondly, that we should engage in a project, pilot in the first instance, to determine in a village the extent of the lands purchased. So you start off by saying, let me know what was purchased. And then you go to the records to see who is exercising paper ownership and or actual occupation. So you see whether those lands still belong to the people who buy them, the village, so to speak, or whether those lands have, through prescriptive rights and other means, change hands, and see exactly where these lands are located and how they got to where they are. How they got to where they are. The idea being to get a picture of what has really happened in every village with village lands. But starting with the pilot, so you learn from the pilot experience. And then to make a determination of whether there would have been injustices, not illegalities, injustices in terms of whose hands the lands are now in, and seek to redress the injustice. And I'm using the word injustice advisedly, because if you talk about legality, it's another problem. Because the point was made earlier about prescriptive rights. The state of Guyana inherited lands from the British who had conquered the whole place and owned the whole place. Well, that's been disputed now in the Amerindian areas. But the state, through a process of conquest, so to speak, occupation, take over Guyana. So this belonged to the Queen. And when she left, it belonged to the state. How moral is it for a state which acquired land that way to change the law to say that if you live on state land, you can't get prescriptive rights. But if you live on private land where people buy, you could get prescriptive rights. The state not looking after the people, it's looking after itself. And that's what's happening in Guyana. In 2010, I think it was, they changed the law. And they say, state land, you can't trespass and get prescriptive rights after 21 years. But private lands, you could trespass and get prescriptive rights after 12 years. And let me expand what this means. A lot of us do not understand when we talk about the state of people of African descent and how institutional arrangements have disadvantaged us. I am using the institution of prescriptive rights as one example. Because the people who are most affected by prescriptive rights are people of African descent. And that's an institution that the state has in place that helps to dispossess us and create an injustice. And it's those kinds of things that we have to address as a part of the decade which speaks to justice, recognition, justice, and development. So when somebody tell you, what's your problem? You could tend to get the contract and all of that. They're not telling you and accepting that there are lots of institutional arrangements in the country, one of which is prescriptive rights that are dispossessing people of African descent. And the state is not taking responsibility for correcting the injustice in the interests of people of African descent. And that is only one example of the injustices, but I think is one of the most stark of the examples. If I were to give you another example, I'll give you two other examples. The other one would be the fact that our history is not taught. And so the state does not take any responsibility to give us the environment in which we could be recognized for who we are. But the history that is taught formally and the history which is taught informally, the one worse, but is taught informally, says all sorts of things about us. And the one that is taught formally does not say much about us. So we not recognized for who we are in the official scheme of things in the country. So that's another injustice. And the other one I would refer to is employment law. We have a system of employment law where contracts are designed in such a way that you could be fired without cause. 1 month's notice, 3 months' notice, you're out of work with a constitution which guarantees you employment. And those laws need to be changed. People ought to be able to be protected when they're in a job, and the contract could be terminated or determined based on wrongdoing, based on bankruptcy and things like that, but not based on fancy. Not based on fancy. We presently could fire people based on fancy. And so, for example, a number of people at GCOM have been fired based on fancy, and 2 years pass and they can't bring the case properly. 2 years. They hurry and fire the people and charge them, and 2 years pass, and these cases can't be brought. And I doubt whether there are really cases that can be brought. And those are some of the injustices that we are confronted with. And therefore, the question of development also arises, because given how we have been disadvantaged, unless there is equitable consideration, then we are the same starting line, but the race is about equals. All of us going to the starting line to run the race, but some got track through and some ain't got traction. But you're running the same race. In the same, so is the problem. You could run the race, you could win, you could lose. But in a situation where some got track shoe and some got track shoe, right? That and all. So, brothers and sisters, this is the kind of situation we are confronted with. But today we are specifically addressing the question of land. And the hope is that we'll go through a process, starting here, going to the villages for educative purposes and consultations on these matters. And coming back here during the course of this year to finalize a disposition on this land matter so that we could engage the powers that be in whichever form is preferred, whichever form is preferred. And I have to say that because Apartheid G was preparing to engage the powers that be in discussions, and they are refusing to discuss. Rather than discuss, they're trying to destroy us. And unfortunately, like our history, we have a few brothers and sisters who have been co-opted into the process of the possible destruction, unfortunately. But we will stay the course. We're going to stay the course. Suffice to say that these matters have to be dealt with by the collective. It can't be dealt with by some coordinating council with Apartheid G. And so the proposition is that we conclude here on a process that would see us moving from here to consult with our people, and beyond those consultations to come back to the position that we could then advocate where necessary and how necessary. Against that background of the presentations made and what I've said, I'm going to open the floor for discussions. I want to recognize the presence of some people who may be able to help us to take the discussion forward. For example, we have Mr. Trevor Ben in the house, who used to be in charge of lands and survey. We have Ms. Audriana Thomas in the house, who indicated to me at the inception that she wanted to make a contribution. But please, we've had the speeches. We've had the speeches. We now want CRIPS contributions on the possible way forward. I think the speeches should have sufficed to alert us to the issues. And we now need crisp contributions, because it is not the intention to take you beyond the 5 o'clock hour, right? So we're going to start. See a number of hands up already. I saw Mr. Hines' hand. So I'll take you in batches. And what you have to say may include questions that the panelists may be asked to answer. Mr. Hines, number 1. Mr. De Silva, number 2. There is somebody else across there, the back there. Number 3. One, 2. Who's the third person I pointed to? All right, the 5 of you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we'll come around. We'll take the 5 and then we'll come around to this side. Please, we don't want epistles, right? We're dealing now with gospel. And please, unless you're one of those scared persons, please look to the east. from where they say wisdom comes, and from where the camera will be looking at you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alexander. In the interest of time, I will be very brief because I just want you to perhaps assist. I'm glad that Mr. Ben is here. I'm seeing him over there. But you did see that when you were part of the Constitution Reform Commission, you mentioned the 6 tiers that were introduced, and they were only able to introduce a part of that. What I would like to know, and to add as well, what the surveyor had said and what the historian has said, we will have our engagement after this, because there are a couple of things I want to raise on what the historian has said and what you have said. So, but I will talk to you about that separately, because this has to do in relation to land, transported land that has been bought by enslaved people after emancipation. And my grandfather and grandmother and them, they are part of that exercise. And I will speak to you about that a little after. But I want Mr. Alexander to tell me, what is the relation? You did say that as far as the communal, the undivided lands are concerned, the NDC, they have some control and say over that. I want to know, what is the relationship with the municipalities in relation to undivided land? That's my question.
Let me go that right away. I did say that I referred first the Municipal and District Councils Act. The municipality also has control of undivided lands, but not privately owned undivided lands.
Just to add, I should get a point out, because I asked that question against the background of the establishment of the Lands and Surveys the Commission Act and against the Municipality Act. I want to suspect that there may be some more rights. I'm not sure, but I'm glad that Mr. Ben is here. I will try to seek a response from him on that, because I need to know what is that kind of position in relation to undivided lands and municipalities.
All right. Lands and Surveys is responsible for state lands, and state lands would normally be also categorized as undivided lands. In municipalities, not all state lands are under the control of the municipality. There are some, and there's a process by which they become under control, but not all. And in the instances where they are under control, it's not a circumstance where they can sell those lands.
Thank you very much, Common Chair. In the interest of time, I'll go straight to the point. I am wondering if it could be considered that we at the International Decade for People of African Descent could declare today, or to have a declaration of emergency of the state of affairs of people of African descent in Guyana. So we have a two-pronged approach, the approach that you signal that we should have, but in addition to that, we declare a state of emergency and come out from this and moving forward into a specific special declaration, an Ipadaji Georgetown Declaration on the state of emergency.
My response to that would be that we could, in fact, during the course of this session, there could be a small team that steps aside to draft the Critchlow Declaration. All right. Who is the third person over this side?
I am wondering if Ipadaji can give us more professional guidance when it comes to the prescriptive rights. That we can consult somebody who would give us quality information that we're not getting from the lawyers, or we're not getting from some of the other surveyors.
Well, I'm surprised that you're not getting it from the lawyers. Prescriptive rights is pretty straightforward. The problem with prescriptive rights is that it is done sometimes under the radar. Whenever somebody applies for prescriptive rights, it is advertised. providing for people who own the land to make an objection. But very often, half of them overseas, the other half don't read the papers or the gazette, and therefore they don't even know. So the big problem really is knowing when somebody has applied for prescriptive rights. Now, you may want to say that then we should probably try to have a mechanism by which we alert people. But remember the point made at the very inception, I think, by Ms. Jackson. Ms. Jackson, critical is knowledge. I know, Mr. Trotman, knowledge is critical. And, you have to be responsible to some extent for that knowledge. But we could consider some mechanism where we alert people to that, because we do have alerts on other matters. So that probably coming out of this, we can add to our alerts any alert in relation to prescriptive rights.
What I really mean is that there's some of us who know nothing or very little about land issues. And the information that we get from the lawyers have a lot of holes for which even some of the surveyors don't inform us. And we, being ignorant about these issues, don't even know what questions to ask. And that's where we're slipping up, because we don't know what specific questions to ask our lawyers and the surveyors. And most times, or sometimes, they don't volunteer to tell us alternatives and bring it up. That's the issue.
Permit me to respond, if you may. No, this issue of prescriptive rights is not something that has suddenly propped up over the past few years. This has been with us for forever, right? We are responsible for the stewardship of our property. And insofar as there's a law, right, that deals with adverse possession and prescriptive rights, and information is free and accessible to everybody, right? What I can say, right, is just that we need to be, first of all, aware, and secondly, to ensure that we are informed. Now, if you go to a lawyer for information, the lawyer will give you whatever they envisage is necessary from their perspective, right? Everybody has a responsibility to view things from the vantage point they see it. The landowner would see things differently. The occupier would see things differently, right? So if you require knowledge on how this process is implemented, it's outlined clearly in the Act, right? And my advice is that we, first of all, we can probably disseminate information, right? Extracts from the Act in a some form of booklet, right? So if I don't know if that is something that has been published before, but I know the lawyers, right, have been putting together small booklets to highlight certain things like domestic violence, so and all those things. And I know for sure that a lot of conversation is being had as we speak on this issue. This evening, there's going to be a talk, right, on the role of the surveyor in the prescriptive right process. And there's going to be on Zoom, right? And it's the Association of Surveyors hosting it, and they're sent out invitations. What I can probably do is forward that link, right? To as many people as possible. You could probably share a link and see if you can log in. But the information is there, and if you need a flyer or something like that to sort of spell it out a little better, that'd be something that I think we can organize. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. I want to thank Ipadiji for this very enlightening afternoon. My question basically is directed at our historian, Mr. Johnson. Because you mentioned that in the process of building the railway, and I dare have the public road, the East Coast Public Road, that some injustices were meted out to the villagers. I know for a fact that I live on the public road, that you have 115, that where the public road is, that's a lot. So that when you go to the next lot, it's 117. So 116 is out of the picture. The railway embankment now, my primary concern is the fact that the government has now announced that they're building a 4-lane road along the railway embankment. Now those lands, they weren't paid for, as you mentioned, and they've already begun surveying along that area. What right do the people have in relation to, because when they have these roads, they normally say that this is the government's reserve, that you were taking up a section of the government's reserve in relation to the width of the road. With the railway embankment, how do we deal with that? Maybe the legal part, Vincent and so on can address it.
I think in some regards you're faced with a fait accompli. And why do I say that? I say that because a regime over decades has been established in a matter like that. The railway embankment may well be, by now, a public road covered by the Roads Act. And a public road covered by the Roads Act gives authority to the central government in relation to the reserves alongside that road. So we may well be, on that specific matter, faced with a fait accompli. I'm not quite sure that that is an issue that can be easily addressed. Now, there was a third person over here. Go ahead.
Just before that, Mr. Alexander, we have some folks online as well.
Yes, we'll take them after we come off of these. There's
Next.
two more for this side.
Good afternoon to everyone. First, I'd like to allude to Brother Vincent, that you alluded that when the Crown had left Guyana, the lands were given over to the state. And to my research, I would prove that to be incorrect, that insofar that after the Crown had left Guyana, the slave had, our ancestors pooled their monies to buy the lands. It took
No, just hold up in. Hold a moment. My reference to the land being given over to the state was not in reference to the lands that were purchased. It was in reference to what you call the Crown lands. When the Crown left Guyana, they were already private lands, but they were lands which were not private. And my reference is to the Crown lands, now called state lands, and not the lands that had been acquired by people. And that's why I said that the ex-enslaved had purchased. So yes, they already had purchased lands when the Crown left.
I'm guided, brother.
Because the Crown left in 1966.
I stand guided. Okay, to move on, about two more issues right quick. The other is that, do we see a process in which what is being done in the Apartheid Guyana and so on as regard ancestral land? Is there a process that you go into the villages and seek out the youngsters? Because most of us here today are aged, I should say. And we should identify within these villages young people that should we pass on, that will be able to carry on the struggle. Because look at the issue of Maka. And to my research, Maka doesn't only start from the land that is being disputed. it from right out to the police station, right down to the back, because after slavery were abolished, the ancestors bought estates and not villages, right? Estates. That's one. The other thing is that question I have to pose, you don't have to respond to it, but keep it in your record, is that with the parade ground, I've learned from Sister Pinda on my research and other avenue of research that parade ground is not what you think it is right now. Parade ground starts from the Chetty Jagan Dental School and it stretches way down to that other end. And my question is, not only parade ground, but I did some research and it came up with the village and more being a slave ancestral village. So my question to the audience or Ipadaji is, what process or do you have in your program a process of reacquiring those land that belongs to our ancestors? Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon.
All right. The question of parade ground, we know that that is not disputed in terms of ownership. That is state land, for all intents and purposes. Though we know what happened there with our ancestors, when it happened, it was already strong land. And parade ground extends, the original parade ground extends from New Market Street to Commoner Street, Carmichael Street to Waterloo Street. That's the original parade ground. But it's not land up for claim, so to speak. The claim on parade ground is spiritual claim because of what occurred there in terms of the 1823 slaughter of our brothers and
okay, my question is, you sort of differ for my research. Can you have any evidence to prove otherwise that these lands I'm talking about, parade ground, with the inclusion of the Teddy Jagan Dental School and the gardens where the statue of Mahatma Gandhi is right now, do you have any evidence to prove otherwise that these lands are supposed to be our, let's say, parade ground in its entirety? Do you have any?
I have said to you just now that parade ground in entirety stretches from New Market Street, which is the northern boundary of the Promenade Gardens, to Commoner Street, which is beyond the dental school, to Waterloo Street, which is the eastern boundary, and to Carmichael Street, which is the western boundary. So we don't have any
Okay,
dispute.
I stand guided, my brother, but my question is now should be, what do we intend to do to reacquire the entire plot of parade ground so it will be passed on to future generations of African Guyanese? Thank you very much.
The plot you're referring to belongs to the people of Guyana. I don't know of any history which suggests that any of our ancestors purchased those areas from the plantation owners who owned them at that time. And those lands would have been acquired by the state. They may be state lands or they may even be government lands. Category we haven't talked about today. That doesn't give you ownership. Thank you. The issue you've raised is beyond the remit of this forum, from my perspective. From my perspective, Ipadaji does not occupy all the space where African Guyanese organizations are concerned. And therefore, if there are African Guyanese organizations who are of that view, one, they could pursue the matter. Two, at an appropriate time, they could seek to bring Ipadaji into the fray, meaning not the coordinating council. Ipadaji is 65 organizations. At a forum of those 65 organizations, there could be a discussion about that specific matter, because the matter you raise is not within the remit of what we've set out to do today. It's beyond that remit. I'm not saying yea, I'm not saying nay, but I don't think that is one that we could conclude on today, because we haven't entered into a discourse on that matter. There's one other person this side, then we go to the people online.
Good evening, families and friends. State Crown lands that has been transferred to state lands. How do we own our foreparents' lands that were Crown lands? For instance, there are lands in Myconi, upper Myconi Creek, where soldiers came back from the war that the Queen gave to Africans. How do you get back those lands?
Well, first of all, the lawyers will tell you that if you want to retain lands or regain lands, you have to have the evidence of ownership and or occupation, so that in any such circumstance, specific work will have to be done to unearth and provide the evidence. When that is unearthed and provided, then one could pursue reacquisition if
But
it has
what-
been lost.
What would happen, for instance, let's say just after 1964, a lot of African people, lands lost, were lost. The documents
That's a
destroyed.
good one.
Some of the children are alive. How do we get back those lands?
You can't seek to get back lands unless you have some evidence of the right to the lands. The evidence is going to be either documents or being able to prove extended occupation.
Okay.
That requires work on the ground.
Walk on the ground.
I can't sit here and beyond what I've just said, give you an answer to your question.
So how, would I be able to consult anyone up there on those lands, those Queen Crown lands?
If you be able to consult,
Anyone for the Crown lands that was transferred to state lands? That should be.
somebody say something? Huh?
Because I can give the name of some lands in Myconi that African people are living on. One is Karasibi and one is Congobal. Oh, that's what for parents' lands. Yes.
Okay, so while you were wrapping up, Mr. Alexander, you mentioned moving forward. And you mentioned the need for us to focus on not selling, but letting. Because this conversation is not happening in isolation. We are a growing country, there's investment interest, especially Brother McCray dealing with in BV, etc. So I want to put my comments and question towards moving forward. One, in your consultation, we'd like for us to speak with villagers. How would you like your lands in the back if interest from private sector, local or foreign, to be developed, right? To benefit the community. What are some of the stipulations you're looking for? Submit it in writing to the head table. Two, once we establish the answer to the first question, what follows would be events such like this when we go into villages. This young man asked earlier, persons who need to do a will, if a template can be shared, just like how you passed out this information today, asking for some legal volunteers. You can put it on your Facebook page, etc. A basic framework on what is required for will. Because I've heard at least 3 different speakers mentioned how in the past we'll speak, oh, this is your grandfather land, this is wherever land, or whatever. And the issue is, I don't know which part my grandfather land there, right? So my third comment would be, as we do these consultations, for us to look specifically at helping persons of age, which is a greater percentage of this crowd, to be able to prepare a will. So 5 and 10 years down the road, we don't have to have an event like this where somebody could look back and say, Apartheid has helped us with this template, that now we have wills in each one of the villages. There's at least a few JPs. We work with them and have them have a template of wills so we can leave, grown people can leave will, so we don't have this level of confusion. And the last point would be, the speaker before me mentioned about young people. I think what's critical to me why I came here is that I know of Brother McCray will be posting on Facebook and I'll be following what is going on there. What's critical to me is like, 1, there is business interest, and 2, I would like to see my village develop, but it must be developed in a sensible, sustainable way. And at least 2 persons so far has asked for education. So I think some level of education, or even presenting different models that work in different parts of the world, could help us. So when we are suggesting ways of implementing and moving forward, as you're mentioning, this event is about, let's really focus on what we can do to get value from not just the oil and gas sector, but other things that could come and help our villages. Thank you.
All right, my reference to Latin was to emphasize the point that the law as it is now does not provide for the undivided lands to be sold. My reading of the law says to let. Now, what happens in the future is a function of what the people will wish to happen from a collective process. On the question of education, I would agree with you that there's need for education. And I think that we will have to try to get the local authorities, for example, who purport to represent the people, to be a part of that process. Apartheid also could, through its member organizations, attempt to have that kind of outreach. But I don't see Apartheid's central body being the body doing that itself. It has to work with the organizations. In as much as we may also seek through social media to use the platform to do some of it as well. We go to the online people.
Online, okay. We see we have Christopher Wilson, first hand up. Mr. Christopher Wilson, go ahead.
Okay, good day everyone. Based on the information from the first speaker that ancestral land is not constitutionally articulated in Guyana Constitution. However, you could file a constitutional motion. In relating to that, how would that body, well, you all would help those people who ancestral lands are being taken away, or there's a drive by the government to basically obstruct ancestral land? Is it that you all have any plan in place that you could organize all these people that listen? It might have to go to the judicial system, either in Guyana or probably in Trinidad and Tobago, the ICC, to secure all those rest of ancestral land. You all have any plan in place set for that?
Please be reminded that we said we are starting a process here. One of the next stages would be the outreach to the local areas. So we don't have a record here of all the ancestral lands. there even the question of what's an ancestral land will become an issue. I don't know, for example, that what I'm seeing is an ancestral land. In fact, I tried not to use the term. Is what you're seeing are ancestral lands. But what we are intended to do is to leave here with a process that takes us on an outreach that will inform what is and what can be done. So this is the beginning of a process.
Okay, great.
Okay, Mr. Wilson, one more at the back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alexander, and good afternoon to everyone. It's evening. I'm sitting here and I'm conflicted. I'm asking myself, I've spent the past 3 days since I saw this advertisement, pacing in front of my mirror, going to bed at 3 in the morning, because I'm saying, this is what I'm going to say. This is what I'm going to say. And because there's a lot that I would like to say, having gone through an experience with land for 28 years. But I'm sitting here and I'm conflicted because I'm like, what should I say? How should I put this? And I'm still going to say some of what I came to say. My family, I'm from Coverdale. My family, we're the Thomas and the Clarks from Coverdale. We're a little different in terms of it's not state land, it's not cooperatives. And the transports were distributed in Coverdale in the first sets of transports was in 1842. My great-great-grandfather, John Clark, his first transport was in 1843. My great-great-grandfather, Jack Thomas, his first transport was in 1849. I have in the village of 459 persons, my family members, Thomas and Clarks, are 250 persons. And we've been living there since 1843. And so we have been very quietly in that corner for 183 years now. We've been living there. I sat here for a few hours and I have not heard anything about land as economics or much about land as economics. I brought my daughter here because her future is tied to that land. She must see that land. That land, as we put it, is our great-great-grandfather's poverty reduction strategy for the family. So I would like to present to you what I do for a living is I work as a consultant. I look at complex things and help to organize them into steps, into achievable steps. So I'm listening to you here this afternoon, and what we have developed is the John Clark and Jack Thomas family poverty reduction strategy, family growth and development plan, creating and capturing more value for our family. 183 years of generational growth and development. We didn't just limit it to wealth, generational growth and development. We've established, still forming, the Thomas and Clark Family Development Group, and our motto is organizing for our family development. This is our form of resistance. Organizing for our development. I think it was the founder, leader of the PNC, I think, who said, organize for your development. I just want to underscore the point of the importance of organizing for your development. I've heard a lot about what the local government should do, and I've heard a lot about what but I want to talk about as families. So we're looking at our poverty reduction strategy in the context of family economics. We talk about the village economy, we need to talk about village economics. We talk about family economics. Families make up villages. And so how can we create more value from our land, from our skills and expertise, from our numbers? We have 250 family members at Coverdale. How can we create and capture more value from that? And so I'm going to wrap this. I know I don't have much time. I spent days trying to think. Even before I came late because I sat down organizing what I would say. And so this is where very often what happens, we look to somebody else to liberate us and to free us and to determine our destiny. This is where our great-great-grandfather left a whole estate for us. Why are we sitting and trying to think that somebody else must determine our destiny? We must determine our own destiny, but we need structure. I'll share this with you quickly. I went to the bank one day and was in a discussion for some financing. When I left the bank, I went home to my daughter. I said, girl, I said, babe, I said, one of the things that people don't teach our people is the level of discipline and organization that is required to win and to be successful. So I'm listening to all of the discussions here this afternoon, and I'm saying all of this is nice, but sometimes what we do is stomping on the ground. We're stomping on the ground. A friend of mine said to me, how can we move beyond being broad and shallow and getting narrow and deep? And so I want to say today that I like the discussion. It's knowledge transfer, it's educational, but I'd like to add to another item, problem solving. When I leave here, I hear people asking, when I leave here, I have a 28 years problem. How do I address this problem? I'm wrapping this up now, but here it is, let me say. So we've developed our own poverty reduction strategy. It has been working in our family for 183 years. And according to my daughter, she said, Mommy, what we're doing now, it would work for the next 1,000 years. She must have that orientation because that's our succession plan, our young people. And so I want to, this is, because I work on projects, and this is what I heard Farrakhan said something. He said, it's not that Black people don't make it, but those who make it, they don't go back and help the community. And so this is where I work as a, thank you. I work as a consultant. I have skills in taking complex, complicated things, organizing them into a family development strategy after 183 years, and mobilizing and organizing people. And so what we are saying, some of my colleagues are reviewing this strategy to see if it makes sense. We think it makes sense. And what we want to offer is, we have a company, a consultancy firm, my colleagues rather. I have an occupation, but I also have a vacation. This is my vacation, not to get it mixed up with my occupation. And then, so my colleagues, they manage Global Perspective Inc. And it's a consultancy firm. So what they're thinking, they're reviewing this strategy. If the strategy makes sense, then what they would like to do is perhaps explore funding to work with groups, perhaps work with families. It's a clear strategy with strategic aims, strategic goals, and all the rest of it as to how do you organize and mobilize families. So I'd just like to end with that. We can talk about that more. And the last thing I'd like to say in 30 minutes is that you said, 30 seconds, sorry, 30 seconds. You said that what you're doing, this is commendable. It's the beginning of a conversation. It's a beginning of getting people to look at complicated issues and break them down for them. It's the beginning of trying to help to find solutions. I can tell you, we had a lot of problems in our community, a lot of problems. But I also like to say, we also need to be honest in our community. There is another aspect, which is classism in the Black community. The Black bourgeois versus the ordinary Black people, right? And as I stand here today as a victim of the Black bourgeois for 28 years, who have been trying to take my family's land away from us with the court system, the judge on the bench who grants an injunction and against us who are the transported owner. And that injunction was held for 2 decades. Now we are back in the court after 28 years, all we're trying to do for 28 years is to bring our side of the story. These are Black people. So I just want to say that we have issues in our own family, in our own community that we also need to address, and we need to address the reality of classism in the Black community. Thank you.
I would suggest on the matter of the family plan that you may wish to have further conversation with our secretariat, in the first instance with the CEO. I'm going to take Dr. Matthews, then I'll take 2 from the platform.
Good afternoon, everyone. Head table, good afternoon to you too. My name is, I am Gavin Matthews Bay. And Bay is a very long story, but I'm going to make it short. As a historian, I listened to you when you put forward what you have studied so far. And I prepared just like the young lady before I came in. I went way back as 1856, the 2nd of June, 1856, where British then went into, how should I put it, a treaty. And that treaty would have signed and be completed since 1777. But it had versions of that treaty. Because if you check history, history would have tell you that British would have come into the Guyanas or got the accession into the Guyanas in 1831. What happened after then was a whole calamity because they were fighting 2 sets of people. One, the Serene people, which were known as the Aboriginal after, and then the Amerindians. What happened after then is what we are left with as a people. Because a people who do not know their history has no claim to the land in which they are from. Some people told us that our history began after slavery. It did not. It was way before slavery. I started studying a fellow by the name of Ivan van Sertima, a Guyanese, who wrote in his journals, they were there before Columbus. I'm not disrespecting anyone on the table. I'm just basically a researcher. I'm 45. I wish I've been doing this since I was 20, because the knowledge that I've gained now, I would like to pass it on. And believe me, I'm telling you now, he who forgets his history are being identified as an abundant mint, because that's where your land has been taken from you. Your property has been taken from you because you cannot identify. That's what everybody's been talking here, especially the head table. I'm just adding. But I'm basically saying that after 1966, before 1966, Crown lands were loaned to the British. It was a loan via way of treaty in 1777 and 1778. And they passed it on after Guyana became independent. So from British Guyana to Guyana and the subjects thereof. And because we cannot claim anything, they're using the same system they use in the Western colonial style. Since you belong to the system, you're subjects of the system, you have no claim and no ownership. And that's what they keep fighting us with. We're identifying, we're saying we have purchased land, we have this and we have that. And they're still fighting against us, just like the brother on the head table here, he said, we who have lands or who can claim it are under attack. And they're not only putting it in that particular perspective, they're taking it away from you who are in this central city that they call Georgetown. Because at the end of the day, 10 years from now, they're making sure that we have no claim of Georgetown. Neither we cannot stand and represent any portions of Georgetown or Region 4. And I want to say this to the head table. I like what you're doing. And I want to put my adds and bits to it in the research process. Just like you said, search a bit of archives, I have it right in front of me here. And was looking up what you were saying just now. In very quick succession, this is how I get to know of the 2nd of June, 1857. And I have more to do some research on. And I would like to add what I have gained so far to my knowledge to Apartheid and to those who want to know more. I thank you very much.
All right, what should be noted is that at the head table, we have 3 persons who have volunteered to be here to share their knowledge with us today. They are not they're not a permanent head table of the Apartheid. They will be welcome to continue to work with us, as much as you will be welcome The person to speak with to make that engagement possible is our CEO. We'll take 2 persons from the platform now.
All right, I see iPhone, the hands were up. This was up a long time ago. iPhone, you have the mic and you have the floor. And then we go to another number, and Sandra and Keith. Sandra. So iPhone, you're up. You have the mic. You have the floor. Go ahead. Somebody with iPhone, you had your hands up a long time ago. All right. iPhone. One says, Sandra, go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I am so happy to be part of this. I am living in Canada, but I am willing to add not only my expertise, my information, I could get you documents and also financial help towards this cause. A lot of people said some of the things I wanted to say, but one of the things that I find is very important is that we need to commit to organizing the unorganized. They do this a lot in a union. In organizing the unorganized, one of the things that I would like to suggest, I know it's going to be a financial burden maybe, and I'm willing to help as long as people take my money and do what they say they're going to do with it. I think in Guyana you need to go around to the village and start educating people. I don't remember, I think it's the brother, I don't remember your name, brother, but you said that that will depend on the municipality. But that is if the municipality knows what needs to be said, because a lot of people just think that we know, like that the villagers know or are educated into how to help themselves and the people. And I'm telling you, even in Canada, they're not. And so as a union person, this is what we go around and do and educate the people. So the first thing I think important in anything is awareness, knowledge, and education. That's the first step. And to do that, I would suggest that you organize. I don't know who's going to be doing it. Find people that will do it. If you need money to do it, I will fundraise for you. I will even use my own money. So you go around to villages, the different villages, and help to educate people so they can educate the villagers. The other thing that I wanted to say, it seems to me like that the government of Guyana is taken away not only from the east or the west, is from everywhere, because I just found out of a place, I think it's close to, it's Soesdijk, I think. They're just going in there right now and they want to build some kind of a smart city. And I know the squatting land, I guess they chased the people, they couldn't live in Georgetown, so they went to the bush, they clear out the bush, they make a little house, and now they're bringing people to take that land from them. It is wrong. We're in a decade for people of African descent. It was declared in 2015. The end comes 2024. And I think we need to stand up right now and ask for what is due to us, which is development, justice, and recognition. And I'm promising you, I will put my email in here, my phone number, whatever you want from Canada, whatever you want from wherever, I will do it. But we need to start doing it and stop saying and leaving it to the villagers, because most of them are very ignorant, and so we need to teach them. I will teach. I just retired, I'll come home and help teach. Use me, do whatever you want to do, but we got to get this done. I'm sick and tired of seeing Black people all over in the world where people are just stepping on us because they get away with it, because we're not organized financially, emotionally, physically, mentally. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Please ensure that you leave your coordinates so that we could further the relationship.
But we have Keith Easton. Go ahead.
Yes,
Keith.
good evening. Congratulations to Apartheid, and thanks for the panel, in order to present this first meeting to focus on the education for the protection of land in Guyana. It's a long overdue topic. I do work in the industry whereby I focus on real estate and land. Two quick questions. One, does Guyana has a legal system to convey agricultural land to either by way of zoning to commercial land or otherwise?
That's the question?
Yes, that's the first question. And the second question is, can any government on the eminent domain seize lands for one purpose and use it for another purpose? Those are the two brief questions.
Thank you.
The first question, there is a provision in our laws for change of land use. So that's the response I can give to that. We do have provision in the laws for the change of land use. There is some element of zoning as well. So we should be able to say where it's intended for residential purposes, agricultural purposes, and for industrial purposes. But there is a mechanism for change of land use. Could you come back on the second one, please, quickly?
And any government on the eminent domain take lands or seize lands for one purpose and use it for another purpose. That is, all right, yeah, go ahead.
All right, that's a matter that will have to be taken up by the affected persons and the courts. Right?
All right.
We, for example, are keenly looking right now at the situation in Mocha Arcadia, because the chances are that that may have occurred, though it has not come to full fruition. But another panelist would want to comment.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a very good question, because that question often keep propping up. I think there's always going to be attempts to change the initial reason for acquiring land. And that happens because sometimes the development fail and they want to go to another development. It's up to the affected party to raise the concern and make the objection, because what he's calling eminent domain is what we call acquisition for public purpose, and the law is very clear on that. But if it's challenged, then it would be probably a hearing and it could be reversed. But if it's not challenged, then it will go. So I don't think it's an automatic something that a party would acquire land for one purpose and use it for another purpose, unless there's some reason to prevent them from doing in the first instance.
All right. Yes, thank you. And the reason why I raised that too is, let us say, like the Perica fires, they fired the Perica Stelling, depending on how that land was earmarked or whatever there. That could be, that's the reason why I asked that question also.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Someone like you should be someone who also gives the coordinates so we can spread our wings a bit. The colleague in the white t-shirt. Oh, all right, sorry.
Good afternoon, members of IPID.
Yes. The mic is on.
Okay, I'm Raphael Monroe. I'm Raphael Monroe from Region 6. I hail from Region 6, but I live in Region 5. I will be brief. I have in front of me a copy of a will of the 7th day of February 1887. On this will, there are a number of estates listed: Plantation, Elifdi, which my former CEO of Georgetown Hospital, George Monroe, has a transport of. I mean, he's deceased. I'm in court. There is Plantation New Market, which is number 63 Village. I saw on television last year where the First Lady mentioned that she was going to make that a tourist destination. I made a comment by asking if that was state land. On this paper here, this document, you have Plantation Messiah. You have also Plantation Rose Hall, which he was a part, Rose Hall, that's under quarantine. Plantation Port.
I'm gonna go get this drawing printed at.
Pardon?
Go ahead, you go ahead.
Plantation Port Morant, where Mr. Monroe was born.
Hello. Pleasant
Go ahead.
afternoon.
Good afternoon. Go ahead.
Yes, to the facilitator, members of the panel, and to those who are participants in the audience. I've taken on board many of these comments, and obviously there is a problem with communication. There's also a problem that could be easily solved in terms of networking, in terms of ecology and the related bodies getting into areas, especially rural or hinterland areas, where there are bona fide people, not just melanized people, but bona fide people who are seeking to use lands that are otherwise not regulated, parceled, whatever it is, by the government per se, but may fall under the purview of, for instance, lands and survey. I say this because there are two cases, or two areas I would like to mention about. Recently, there was an issue in the Kanji Creek up in Barakara. It was there and then that quite a few people recognized that they did not take the opportunity in advance to go to lands and survey, for instance, or to the pertinent land giving body that would have issued them the right title, so that when the government or whoever moved in under whatever guise would have had to take caution in doing what they had to do. The other area I want to speak about finally is Kokwani. Sadly, Kokwani is a district, an area that has been left somehow from perception and in reality to itself as it relates to the development of people who are seeking to eke out an existence, especially those who are interested in going to the land, farm, and raise livestock. What has been happening up there, though, is that before you cross over to Kokwani, for instance, there are large tracts of land between Aichuni and the landing just before you travel over the Berbice River to Kokwani that people have begun to take cognizance of or have just been alerted about. Now, for anybody who is interested in being a farmer and who's going to the land, not just for subsistence, but for commercial purposes, which pertinent body they need to contact to secure such an interest. And finally, I think it is opportune at this juncture in time for Epology, for particulars in lands and surveys, and any other conscious or consciousness movement that is dealing with people's rights, dealing with legacies and so on, to come together and visit these areas on a constant basis, have town hall meetings, or if not, meetings in schools or at the residences of people who are so accommodating, and have members of the community, including school children and young people, attend these meetings so that the right information could be disseminated and people, by and large, can know who are the bona fide bodies that they can extract or elicit the right information as well as the right approach. Thank you so much, and I look forward to these visible efforts in the very near future, because I'm aboard with that too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have in our assembly, so to speak, the former commissioner of lands. I don't know if Trevor would wish to comment on the aspect pertaining to the lands between, on the approach to the Berbice River, which is in the area of Araima or something like that. Trevor, you wish to comment?
I am not familiar with the issue that he has just raised, but I just like to say that those areas are areas that are quite open and lots of state lands that are available for leasing, and people have been occupying them. I'm aware of, but I'm not particularly informed about the case that he spoke of.
Thank you. Royston? I'm going to take two more after this, and then we get to the declaration.
Hi, good afternoon, colleagues.
Identify the two already.
I want to really applaud the efforts of the panelists responding or presenting on the issues they did and responding readily to the questions posed. I think largely while we have an issue with our domestic lands in our villages and other places, equally we have challenges with our lands in our mining areas and the forestry areas. A lot of times that's organized with a different kind of challenge. But I think we need to give some focus and some trust in that direction as well. since sometimes the very government agencies which would issue the lands in the first place are the ones that give you the challenge to maintain and continue managing that space. And so I think there is need for us to look to see what we can do for our brothers and sisters who may be having forest lands and mining lands, to give them some trust forward so that they too can preserve what they do and make well for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a brother here.
First of all, I must congratulate the head table for bringing a program like this to the fore. But I'm looking at this flyer that has been shared out, notifying us of the formation of this credit union. But an important word is being used here that is at the moment a very, 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 what I must say, contradictory word in the political sphere: cooperative. I'm saying this because the Minister of Labor in Parliament indicated of his intention to run in the face of cooperatives. From his words, he has indicated that cooperatives are a means of filling the pockets of those who run the cooperatives. And as such, he intends to go after cooperatives. Now, I am a member of a very vibrant cooperative on the highway. We speak about, I've been hearing about villages all the time. I'm not hearing about cooperatives. I'm a member of the new Highway Producers Co-op Society. Our financial records are up to date, but at our last general meeting, a few guys brought the meeting to an abrupt end in total disarray. Subsequent to that, we heard that an IMC has been placed in charge of the cooperative. The question was asked, where in the constitution of cooperatives IMCs could function? Up to this day, we haven't gotten an answer. Up to this day, nobody knows how a viable cooperative is proceeding with their task. We have got a block lease for lands totaling 1,500 acres of land. These lands had Purple Heart, Green Heart on them. They probably still have. But now we are hearing that this IMC is taking control of our cooperatives. What could be done to salvage the situation? Mind you, these cooperatives came from the big tobacco. He said Guyana, the name of Guyana is the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Now we're hearing something different. So I'm looking at this flyer and I'm very worried with this word cooperative being used when in Parliament is being attacked. Could you elaborate for me, please?
Two things. We don't have a choice in terms of which word we use, because what we have is a credit union cooperative duly registered under the relevant act. We have a credit union cooperative duly registered under the relevant act. And I don't think that as we speak, that our cooperative is endangered because of it's relatively young and has been operating within the required regulations. So we don't feel threatened. But certainly, if Padaji is concerned about the statement made by the minister in relation to cooperatives generally, though it does not affect us specifically. And I would say that if your cooperative has a specific problem that it's confronted with, then let us have a conversation to see if, first of all, we can have an understanding, and if we can render any advice and/or assistance in relation to the peculiar circumstance of your cooperative. I'll take the last person.
Good afternoon to the entire head table.
This is ironical that the alpha will be the omega.
Yeah, and to all of us in this gathering. Now I'm from the village of Denhamstel, West Coast, Demerara, and our village was being bought by slaves. Well, we had the dispensation of the village is that it was parceled off. I think it's 5 letters. You had the A fraction of the village that was given that one, so the residents could have bought and acquired lands. And when you bought the lands in section A, you are entitled to a piece of land in the squatting area, undivided land of 1/10 of that undivided land. Then you had a portion in the burial ground. You had farmlands at the backlands, and that was either they had rice beds and farmlands like farm and provision. So that is our dispensation of the lands in Denhamstel. We had we got an NDC, and now what is happening in the villages? NDCs are being overridden by the CDCs, and these CDCs is an arm of the installed regime. And many of those persons who are in the CDCs are the young people, and they are following the arm of the installed regime, just like how they are bringing up IMCs to destroy the corporations in Guyana. And I want us to see how we can rid ourselves of those INCs and the CDCs, because having those Cs within the midst of us, they will really try to destroy this beautiful land of Guyana. Because many of these people in the CDCs, in the African communities, are your young relatives, and they now are coming up against you, the older folks. And when you try to talk to them, you don't feel good when a young person of about 20-something years gonna watch at you and say, "Mom, move from me. Y'all old and y'all stupid, and y'all old and disgusting. Y'all ain't want no kind of what do you call it? No upward mobility." It is a slap in our face, because we as young persons, we were not able to say that to our elder folks. And once we who grew up with our parents, God, my parents lived, they would have been in their 90s. And I had to show them that respect. I had to show people respect. And when these young people come up to you with this type of behavior and attitude, you feel the best thing to do is to stay away and don't say anything. And even if you try to impart knowledge to them, like to tell them about Barnum, President Barnum, they know nothing and they don't listen to you. So I don't know if, like the former part, the person who spoke before me said, we should try to form groups with ecology and let them try to come out in the area and sensitize us. And I do not think that ecology is going to be allowed to go into the schools, because we know today we were supposed to be over there, and at the last moment we were being denied. So we will have to get bottom-house places and hold our meetings and sensitize our people.
All right, thank you very much. Just one comment. Just one comment. IPADG is an umbrella organization of organizations of the people of African descent. So we do not have branches per se. What we have would be member organizations. We are not averse to working with local people if they want to form a local organization. We're not averse to that, right? So that if any village, local people want to form an organization, we are prepared to work with you to form that organization. And then in that circumstance, your village will have an organization that can relate to us as much as it relates back to the village in an attempt to address the circumstances of the village. We do outreach to the community at large in some regards. So some of our programs, we outreach to the community. Any person of African descent could be involved. But in terms of local operations, we relate to community and other groups that have a life of their own. But we are prepared, if necessary, to help in the establishment of such groups in the local areas. All right, I think I said that was going to be the last contribution. I'm seeing a hand going up. I'm scared to.
Good afternoon. The name is W. Martins from Melanie Damshan. And I'd just like to help my brother and sister that spoke about the society. I'm having here the Laws of Guyana, Act 8801. And we spoke also about education. Many of our young people, we have to really drive and rivet this into their brains because, we know that they are speed-headed. They don't really need the education. They want the fast fix, all right, or the fast money. And I don't know if much of you would have saw on the, whether the internet or which net, what Melanie is going through right now with the society and central government. And we make it very clear to the minister, because we were there at his office, that we are dealing with this book. And if you're not going to deal with this book, where we are concerned as a society and the mother society or grandfather society that LFS Barnum formed in Guyana, in Melanie since 1971, we are going to take you to the court. So don't come and tell us anything but IMC and whatever MC. We are dealing with 8801. I also stand there to give the head table props, because personally, I have learned a lot today about different things. I know about Victoria. My parents and grandparents came from Victoria. But the problem that we are having, and I must stress on this, is to get our young people to understand and to give them the education of what we are talking about. Because we know that this government, the PPP government, is not playing games. They are not playing games. Because the minister said to us that he is forming a group and he is bringing his lawyers into play to have them to do something, I forget the name that he called it, to put the society under the NDCs. I said, Minister, game on. I'm not a lawyer, but you would not pass Mr. Martins because I know what I know. And so we went down to a nice discussion. And so we have to reach him back Thursday. And we're going to get this ironed out. But the fact of the matter is, first of all, big people, educate yourself. Because what we find in these societies, that plenty of the councillors and the society people, they don't understand the very law to which they're trying to guide the people. So you cannot say the young people, but you need to know the law so that when you stand, you can speak with competent authority. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now ask the CEO, Ms. Sampson. No, Sudan. It's the Cooperative Societies Act, Chapter 8801, am I correct? Of the laws of Guyana. You have a mic there?
I do. It works too.
Please proceed.
Chair, if you would allow me a few comments before I read what is a very rough draft of the Critchlow Declaration. But I too want to join with the voices of those who have spoken earlier to really congratulate and thank the panel for what was a really informative discussion. I was really taken by the discussion entirely in the history that was provided about Victoria. We must draw from it because it's applicable in many parts to all of our communities. It may not be the same situation as occurred with the train and where the homes were, but the point is all of the villages lost land as the train moved eastward. I listened with a really pained heart as my sister from the Namstel spoke about the distance between the adults, the older generation, and the young people in our community. And I realized that, and I'm sure you do too, that the fact that education on history is absent from our schools is not an accident. It is not an accident that our children are unaware that they have more of a stake in the history of Guyana than any other of the groups that arrived after the indigenous people. And I will not get into the issue of who is indigenous and who's not, because that is a whole other issue by itself. But the point is that it's very likely that in 1621, Africans arrived here with the Dutch. Indentured laborers came 2 centuries later. We formed the villages, the first villages of this community. We are the persons who created this nation, and our children do not have a full grasp of that, so they don't know what they're losing. And so I don't have an answer to how we bridge the generational gap in terms of communication, but I certainly think it's something that I'm going to pay attention to. I think we ought to be aware that those persons who are busy trying to minimalize and marginalize our community are finding that that gap that exists is one that they can expand and take advantage of. And so we have to protect our young who don't have the knowledge and who are therefore falling prey to what they're being told. And so even though it's painful for us, we have to push, we have to make it really something that they can understand, that can be delivered to them in language that they understand. We have to reach them through this week we did last week we did a simulation of the situation in Victoria with a group of high school students who knew nothing about Victoria and its history, but came away from that understanding what happened to Victoria because they were role playing and they understood what happened in Victoria and that those people, like the people of Mocha Arcadia, lost their land and that they were never compensated, right? So we have to find ways, whether it's music, theater, there are other ways where we can bridge the gap. And so I just wanted to say that we must recognize it is our Achilles heel. Our young people are being used as a weapon against us, and we've got to push back on that. Chair, thank you for that indulgence. Again, I say this is a very rough draft. I want to thank Dr. De Silva because this is his content that I worked with him and put together, and Ms. Myers, who helped us with the language. And here is what we've come up with so far. We, the assembled members of the African Guyanese community, the assembled members of the African Guyanese community here at the Critchlow Labor College on February the 26th, 2023, call on government, non-governmental organizations, the private sector, the media, and the judiciary to address the status of, we ask for their urgent attention to the status of African Guyanese. We are seeking recognition of the rights of African Guyanese on an equal footing as other groups. In particular, their right to work free from discrimination, the right to receive adequate compensation for work, the right for economic justice in the award of contracts. We're also seeking recognition and protection of the human and civil rights of African Guyanese, protection from police brutality, unfair detention, and the lack of access to representation. Seeking recognition and, let me just read this again. Recognition and protection of the human and civil rights of African Guyanese, protection from police brutality and unfair detention, and access to representation and equality before the law. We are also seeking the protection of all African Guyanese owned land, recognition of ancestral lands, and the right of African Guyanese to benefit equally from the distribution of state lands. The recognition of people of African descent, that they should benefit equally from the profits of the energy and environmental sector. And finally, the preservation and teaching of African Guyanese history at all levels of the education system. That is the general outline of the Critchlow Declaration, February 26, 2023.
I noticed one hand up. Go ahead. One omission, which is the equitable distribution of the patrimony of the country insofar as oil and gas is concerned.
You did say that.
I don't hear it. I didn't hear it. There was reference to the oil and gas.
That people of African descent benefit equally from the profits of the energy and environmental sector.
What did you say, equal?
Pardon, sir?
What did you say? What did you say?
I said that people of African descent, Guyanese of African descent should benefit equally from the profits of the energy and environmental sector. Pardon? You'd prefer energy and
Equitably.
equitably instead of equally. Okay. Done.
All right, if there are no other comments of the floor, what I would ask the gathering to do is to authorize the Secretariat of Ipadaji to tidy up the declaration from a linguistical standpoint without any fundamental changes to the content which has been brought to your attention. Do I have your approval?
Specifically of that declaration, and that it be so adopted.
It's been seconded
with a note, and the note is this: our fight for freedom, empowerment is a never-ending fight. So don't go to sleep.
Thank you. Could we have approval by acclamation? Could we have approval by acclamation?
Chair, one last thing, please. You mentioned a little earlier that Ipadaji is a member or an umbrella organization of member organizations. And I want to make an appeal that for members of Ipadaji, we really would like to be sure that Ipadaji represents the widest cross-section of the African Guyanese community possible. Currently, Ipadaji has 65 member organizations, which I think is quite impressive. But there are organizations that exist. I know there's one in Denamstel that is not a member organization, and there are communities where there is no existing organization of people of African descent. In these times, we cannot afford not to be organized. Not being organized is giving a gift to those who would wish to destroy us, because we can be picked off individually. We have to come together to fight this fight. So please do reach out to us. Membership in Ipadaji is a very simple process, and we would love to have you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, CEO Sampson. I would like to take the opportunity, colleagues, friends, comrades, brothers and sisters, both in the hall and online. Thank you for dedicating some time to the work of the community here today. Please note I didn't say for taking time off from your busy schedules, because I do hope that what you've done today is integral to your schedule as much as it's integral to our schedule. We leave here with the intention that in short order, we'll start to do the work across the communities so that we can in fact build on what we have discussed today. And my own hope is that by the time we get to Village Day, which is in November, we'll be in a state of readiness to take forward the process in terms of petitioning what would have come out of the exercise from here through to November. Please bear in mind that some persons have today indicated their willingness to be volunteers. We are open to volunteers. We are very much in the volunteer drive these days, given the circumstances in terms of the subvention. And so anyone who wishes to volunteer, please make contact with the Secretariat and the CEO, who is herself a full-time volunteer. So don't worry with what they say. That if Padaji got some set of people who are beneficiaries, we are a not-for-profit organization registered as a not-for-profit company. And there are no benefits to be derived by the persons who will be referred to as board members. There are no benefits to be derived. The only benefit is the joy of doing the work. And so you're all welcome on board. Thank you very much once again for your presence, and I wish you all a safe journey home. All's well? Huh?
I ain't saying nothing. No. Here, no? Yeah, there's a consultancy.
People, let's get together. Stop all this fussing and fighting. Let's love one another. You gotta help your mother, help your father, help your brothers, help your sisters, help your neighbors and your friends. We are one people, one nation, one destiny. Everybody, y'all. One people, one nation, one destiny. Yeah, yeah.